Well, good morning. Thank you very much for joining me in this video. I want to talk to you this morning about fire retrofit legislation and whether a property that you are selling is or has been fire retrofitted. Sometimes agents will ask me, is it legal to sell a property that hasn't been fire retrofitted? Yes, it is. You can sell it, absolutely. But it's important that the buyer knows what he's getting. If you're representing the buyer, that buyer needs to know because there's liability involved. If something happens or if a fire marshal comes in to inspect and there's deficiencies, they can do a number of things. They can put a work order against the property. They can actually fine the owner of the property, or they can lay a charge against him and he has to go to court to defend, and he will end up with a fine as well. So it's very important that the buyer be aware the building has not been fire retrofitted if it has not. Well, how do you know? How do you know whether a building's been fire retrofitted or not? There is legislation. It's called the Fire Protection and Prevention Act of 1997, and it lays out what needs to be done and what doesn't need to be done. What I'm going to say, first of all, between you and I, don't call the fire department in. I say that because, remember what I said could happen? The fire department can actually register a work order. And so you're thinking of listing the property, or maybe you're representing a buyer and the buyer wants to know the status of the property. It doesn't say on the listing. Don't call the fire department in and end up with a charge against the current owner or a work order against this property that you've created. There are third-party companies that can come in and tell you the status of the property and what needs to be done. But I want to take a look at 4 areas that you need to be aware of, and you can go through. Now, this isn't exhaustive. You need to take the time to read over some of the provisions of the Act, but this gives you a rough idea as a realtor when you're going through a property, if it has been fire retrofitted or not, and if not, what things need to be done. And I'm going to take a look at 4 different areas. The first one is we'll call containment. And that is the issue that if a fire breaks out in a unit of a multi-unit building, how long will that fire be contained in that unit before it spreads to an adjacent unit? And that's a really important factor. It's one of the most important factors. One of the things that they look at is the drywall or the plaster or whatever the surface of the walls, is it fire rated to 30 minutes, that it will take 30 minutes to burn through to the next unit or up to the unit above or down below. And so we want fire rated drywall or plaster that will withstand that. You can take a look. That's hard to tell. You can take a look at that. But certainly if it's paneling, you know you got a problem. Also, you need solid core exit doors, not between the bedroom and the hallway within the unit, but if the unit exits onto a common stairwell or hallway, then that door needs to be solid core, fire rated with a self-closing device, and the trim around it needs to be fire rated solid. So you need to take a look at it. You can tell certainly whether there's a self-closing device on the door and whether the door is hollow core or solid core. It gives you a rough idea about these sort of things. You're looking at containment. And one of the tough ones is the furnace room. If the furnace room abuts up against a dwelling, if it doesn't, if it goes to common area, it's not as critical. But if the furnace room butts up, for example, if there's an apartment right above the furnace room, or if the furnace room, there's a basement apartment going up against the furnace room, it's critical that that furnace room be finished in fire-rated drywall or some kind of device that will withstand at least 30 minutes of burn before it burns through to the adjacent unit. Now, it's hard because most multi-family units are hot water heated. And hot water heating means a boiler, and boiler means all kinds of pipes in the ceiling and probably a reservoir, expansion reservoir in the ceiling, and it's really tough to drywall that ceiling. And so one of the areas that you're going to find most often delinquent is the furnace room. Now, it can be overcome. It may be difficult to drywall if there's pipes all over the place, but you can put sprinklers in if it can be cost effective, and you can deal with fire containment in that way. But the first thing you want to look at is fire containment. The second thing is means of egress. If there's a fire, how do you get out? Now, some people say, well, there has to be 2 means of exit. There really doesn't have to be 2 means of exit, unless the one mean is through another unit. If it's through another unit, then you have to have 2. What I'm most concerned about, and I want you to make a note of this, is if you have a bedroom in the basement that bedroom must have a window, and that window must be large enough that you can crawl out. I want you to imagine you wake up in the middle of the night and you can smell some smoke. You're in the bedroom in the basement as a tenant. You open the door and you're greeted by a wall of flame. How are you going to get out? You're not. You're going to die in that environment because there wasn't an egress window. And you as a landlord or an owner, the last thing you want is to have caused that kind of a problem. So don't include it as a bedroom. Don't have it used as a bedroom if there isn't a means of egress out of that bedroom. So that's very, very important that there be a means of egress. On the main floor of the upstairs, you can always crawl out a window as well as go out through the door. But there needs to be some access in case a fire is in a common area or the main way of exiting is blocked off. All right, the third thing we want to look at is fire and smoke detectors, or at least also carbon monoxide detectors. This is really critical, again, when you have 2 or 3 units in a building that exit into a common hallway or stairway. Those common areas, the hallway and the stairway, must have direct wire interconnected smoke detectors. Now, it's not important, or it's not necessary to have direct wired smoke detectors in the units. Battery operated is okay. But in the common areas, like stairways and hallways, they must be direct wired. So you as a realtor look in and see whether those smoke detectors, first of all, are there, and secondly, whether or not they're direct wired. Now, the Fire Protection and Prevention Act doesn't specifically mandate carbon monoxide detectors. Oh, it's a very, very good idea. But the municipalities can dictate it, and generally they do. But within the unit, there has to be smoke detectors in every unit, and they have to be in some jurisdictions, they'll say now right in the bedrooms, but certainly in all jurisdictions they're going to say so that they can be clearly heard in the bedroom, even if the door is shut. So you have to have those smoke detectors in the units as well as the common areas. And here's another thing. The Act holds the landlord responsible for the functioning and maintenance of those smoke detectors. That's unfortunate because often a tenant will burn the toast, the smoke detector go off, it's annoying to them, so they disable it. Or their kid has a toy and they need a battery, they know where they can find one, they pull the battery out of the smoke detector. You as the landlord are responsible to find out about that and make sure that it's maintained. So fire and smoke alarms, watch for that. The one telltale thing to let you know whether or not they're on top of it is whether they're direct wired in common areas. And then the last thing we want to talk about is the electrical safety. And here the Act says that you need to have an inspection done by an electrical safety authority, and you need a letter of compliance, and that letter of compliance needs to be made available to the chief fire officer if somebody inspects your property. And you as a real estate agent going through, look for the things that you know that may be problematic with electrical, and you can talk to the owner, talk to the seller, talk to your buyer about electrical as well. So those are 4 areas you can kind of keep in mind when you're going through a building that's multifamily, and it'll give you a pretty good idea whether that building's up to code or not. I hope that makes sense. I want to thank you for sharing the time, and we'll look forward to talking to you again next week.